Alright, so in this walkthrough, we'll see how to fetch the service principal and user details from the Entra account to Graph API. So I'll debug the code and step by step go through every line. Nothing much complicated in the code. So before we move on to the code, here is the list of the service principal and the users in the Entra account. So we have 4 users and 10 service principal. Alright, so let's get started. Now this is the configuration file. So as you can see, I have only client ID in this configuration file. As I mentioned in my article, we don't require the client secret key for the graph service client authentication. So that's the reason we don't have the client secret key in the configuration file. So what we are doing is that we are overriding the client service credential and creating the bearer token for the graph service client to be authenticated. I have a detailed article on the topic. I have included a link to this article in the current one. You can check that out. All right, so let's get started with the code. Just build. Yeah, one more thing that I'd like to highlight here is the scope. So the endpoint for the scope is graph.microsoft.com, and the scope permissions. So I'm using this service principal in the code. So the scope permissions, I'll just show that to you quickly. So we require endpoint read write all for the service principal and user read write all for returning the user list. And the type is delegated type and granted through admin consent. Okay, let's move on to the code. So this function basically just reads the configuration settings. So it just returns the client IDs because that's the only setting that we have in the configuration file. Right. So this function would return the list of all the service principals. So and the default the it takes a parameter called filter. If we have the values of which can be a specific service principal or a value of all. So when it is all, it means returns all the service principal. Okay, so let me step into this function. Right. So this is the authentication function that returns the bearer token. So this is going to prompt for a, sorry, I should not have stepped into this function. Okay. So this is going to prompt for a browser-based credential to generate the bearer token. So we have the token ready. Alright, so this is the class that overrides the client service credential class. So it returns a access token credential. Alright, so this is the graph service client. So by default it takes the client service credential, but since we are overriding that with a token credential, we can send a token credential as a parameter to it. And these are the scopes. Okay, and this is the okay. So this part will return the uh, list of all those service principals. All right, and the default file filter here is tag is filtering on the tags that has value of Windows Azure Active Directory integrated app and has a property called as an query as a property called as an top. So what happens is that the graph service client basically returns a list of only 100 objects for a given request. So that value of 100 can be extrapolated to 999, and beyond the value of 999 you will have to use the custom paging that is supported through the graph service client. I mentioned those details in the article. You can check that out. Okay, let's fast forward it to this part. So yeah, so after that, what happens is that it stores the output into a dictionary object. Okay, so here now result should be 10. The count of account should be 10, right? As we have 10 service principals in our Entra. And now hit, okay, let's forward it to this part. So now this dictionary object should also have a count of 10, right? So these are the service principals. All right, since we have a value for filter as all, it's gonna return the entire dictionary. Yeah, so this object should have a count of 10. All right, so let's move on to the user details. Again, this also has a filter of all. I'll just fast forward it here. Again, is the same logic that we had used in the service principal. Sorry, of fetching of the service principal. So again, it's gonna return. Now let's see the value for result. So here we should have a count of 4, as there are only 4 users, right? And dictionary should also have a value of 4. The count 4. So we have dummy user, fabric user 1, 2, and Sachin. Okay, let's move. All right, that's all. So now what we'll do is that we'll filter for a specific value. We- We'll filter for, yeah, maybe all the service principal having the word fabric in it. So we have one, two, three, four. So we have one, two, three, four service principal, and we can do the same for users as well. So we have two users with the keyword fabric in it. Okay. So I'll say fabric. I'll just remove this breakpoint. I'll just put filter here and here. Okay. So again, it's gonna prompt for authentication. Since we have stopped the earlier execution, it's gonna prompt for authentication. So okay. So we have this filter here. So since we don't have a value of all, it's gonna move on to the next else part. So now the dictionary should have a value of, yeah, let me put this here. Yeah, so here it should output to count of 5. Why 5? So we have 1, 2, okay, this also Azure Data Services, so 5, right? And let's do the same for users. Now this will move on to the else part. Yeah, now we should have a count of 2. And fabric user underscore 1 and fabric user underscore 2. Right. So as I mentioned here, so we have a filter for tags having Windows Azure Directory Service integrated. So what happens if I remove this filter? I'll just close this. All right, and we'll see that the count that this graph service client returns for the list of the service principal in the Entra account. So we had 10 user generated service principals. So if we remove this filter on tag equal to Windows Azure Active Directory integrated app, so we'll check how what is the list, the count of the list that this graph service client returns. So do I have a filter? Okay. Okay. So this basically means is that not every service principal has this app display name. Alright, so that's the reason why it errored out. So what I'll do is that I'll just put an breakpoint here. So if the code doesn't step to this apart, rerun the code again. So this has to be handled in the code. If you don't have, if you want to return a list of all the service principal, irrespective of whether they are user generated or third party generated or system generated. Okay. Now here the list, here the count. Let's check the count here. So we have a count of 161. That's a crazy number. Let's randomly check one of them. So it is Azure Synapse Studio. Okay, this is the one that I created. Let's check another one here. So okay, this also is the one that I created. TLS Office Client Service. Okay, one profile service. I'm not sure what are all these. No idea. What's the significance of them? I have no idea. Office TLS. Office 365 Zoom. Okay. All right. So as you can see that there are 161 service principals. All right, but only 10 are visible here. Unsure where are how these, maybe there's a system generated. Not sure. Okay, all right. So that's all for this walkthrough. So I just wanted to highlight that how we can use Graph API to fetch all the relevant details from an Entra account that are tied up to your Office 365 or your other storage accounts and other entities related to your Azure. All right, so in the next article, I'll show how this data that we gathered for the service principal and the users is relevant for Microsoft Fabric. All right, thank you very much for watching this walkthrough. If you do have any questions or comments, do let me know. All right, thank you very much.